never thought a small piece of paper could make my heart race like that. That morning, just as I finished making coffee and was absent-mindedly watching the snowfall from the window, the doorbell rang. A luxurious cream-colored envelope sat neatly in my hand, its gold trim shimmering under the soft morning light. I wasn't prepared for what I was about to see. With the blessings of our families, Haley Johnson and Daniel Carter cordially invite you to their wedding. I froze. I read it over and over, hoping I had misread. But no, the names, printed in glittering gold ink, didn't change. My sister. And the man who used to be my fiancé. Getting married. To each other. I don't know how long I stood there, my hand clenched around the invitation, my heart feeling like it was being squeezed tight. Daniel, the man I once believed I would grow old with, the one who proposed to me on a June night on the Pine Hills of Denver, under lanterns twinkling in the trees while my favorite jazz song played from a small speaker he'd hidden in his backpack. We had been together for nearly 7 years. I thought that love was forever. And Haley, my younger sister by 3 years, once my closest confidant, my childhood partner in crime. I used to believe there was an unbreakable bond between us. And now, they were getting married, and they had sent me an invitation. Attached to the invitation was a small handwritten note, in Haley's writing. Dear Liz, I hope you'll come. It would truly mean the world to me to have you witness my special day. I hope you understand and forgive. Love, Haley. I exhaled sharply, feeling like I had just fallen into a weightless, spinning void. I immediately called the only person who could understand this shock, Alicia, my best friend from college. After just one ring, she picked up. Listen to my voice, I said, barely able to speak. Haley and Daniel. They're getting married. They sent me an invitation. What? They sent you an invitation? Are you kidding? That's a sick joke, right? I wish it were, but it's not. It's right here in my hand. Every word is crystal clear. There was a few seconds of silence on the other end before Alicia let out a loud breath, more like a curse than a sigh. No, Liz, you can't go. This is an emotional trap. They want to prove they've won, that you're weak and broken. I closed my eyes. Part of me wanted to burn the invitation, tear it into pieces and flush it as a way to let go, but another part of me, the one deeply wounded, longed to show that this Elizabeth would not fall apart. I stood up, my voice firm as if I'd just found my breath after a punch to the chest. I'm going. What? Are you serious? I'm going, Alicia. But not to offer blessings, not to forgive. I'm going to show both of them that I've moved on. I'm not shattered. I'm not that girl who was left behind in an empty apartment. Alicia was silent for a moment, then let out a bitter laugh. If you're really going, then make them regret ever inviting you. We'll make a plan. And Liz, you're going to shine. Not for them, but for yourself. I looked at the invitation again, this time with a different feeling. Like facing an opportunity to close an old chapter, an opportunity to be reborn. I would go, and this time, Elizabeth Johnson wouldn't show up with tears, she'd show up with a presence no one could dim. Daniel and I met when I was 26. He was still a structural engineer at an architecture firm in Portland, Oregon. We met at a TEDx conference on sustainable urban development. I was one of the speakers, and he was the one who asked a question that left the entire room silent. From the very first glance, I knew he wasn't someone you could just overlook. His eyes were sincere. His smile had a quiet strength and mystery to it, like he could see the worries in my heart before I even realized they were there. We started with coffee. Then came long walks along the Willamette River, outdoor movie nights, and endless late-night talks about building better cities. He always listened, always remembered the little things I said in passing, like how I liked my sandwich with pickled red onions, or that I once dreamed of being a musician when I was a kid. We were together for almost 6 years. Daniel proposed to me during a Christmas vacation in Vermont, in front of a snow-covered pine tree. The ring he gave me wasn't expensive, but it was exactly the kind I had once said I liked. Vintage, delicate, and not too flashy. At the time, I thought, I've found the one who will hold my hand for life. And I truly believed that, until that fateful day last April. I came home earlier than expected from a business trip in Seattle. My original flight had been canceled due to weather, so I switched to an evening flight without telling anyone, wanting to surprise him. I even picked up his favorite treat, blueberry crumble from the little shop near my hotel. The apartment was strangely quiet when I opened the door. The living room lights were dim. Daniel's jacket was draped over the chair, which was normal, but the pair of nude high heels next to the front door, they weren't mine. I walked in, light as a ghost. The bedroom door was slightly ajar. Then I heard laughter. A woman's voice, familiar in a way that made my skin crawl. Haley. I don't remember how I opened that door, or what their faces looked like in that moment. I only remember standing there, holding the box of crumble, like an outsider watching the tragedy of her own life unfold. Daniel panicked. Haley, pulling the blanket to her chest, whispered my name. Liz, I thought you weren't coming back until Monday. I didn't say anything. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I simply placed the box on the kitchen counter and walked out of the apartment I once called home. 3 days later, Haley called. I didn't answer. Daniel sent dozens of messages, apologizing, explaining how it started with one drunken night and a real conversation, that they didn't mean for it to happen, that he didn't know things would go that far. I read and deleted, over and over, for weeks. Then my mother called, and that's when everything truly exploded. Haley told me everything, she said, her voice trying to sound gentle. I know you're hurt, but the heart, it doesn't always follow logic. You're defending her and Daniel? I just want to keep this family together. No matter what happened, Haley is still your sister. And my dad? He didn't say much, but for the first time in years, I saw him slam his hand on the dinner table. If she's your sister, then that guy is no longer a man in my eyes. Robert, my mom gasped, but he didn't stop. A real man doesn't steal happiness from two sisters, never. I left the dinner table that day with tears falling, not because of Daniel's betrayal, but because I realized my family was breaking apart over something I couldn't control. For 6 months afterward, I practically vanished from social life. I moved, changed hair salons, and buried myself in work at an environmental consulting firm in downtown Portland. Friends slowly stopped reaching out. Haley still messaged me, but I never replied. Then the wedding invitation arrived. Haley wasn't just marrying the man I once loved. She invited me to witness it, as if everything was normal. And that's why I decided to show up. Not to forgive, not to make peace, but to close a painful chapter on my own terms. I would arrive with my head held high in a fiery red dress, and when people turned to look, they wouldn't see a betrayed woman. They would see Elizabeth Johnson, the woman who didn't crumble for anyone. The first weeks after the shock passed like a blur. I moved out of our old apartment and into a small studio in Northeast Portland. It didn't have a river view or a fancy kitchen or a balcony full of plants like the old place. But it was mine. A space no longer haunted by Daniel and Haley's late-night laughter. I started over with a fold-out bed, a second-hand sofa, and a small speaker to play jazz every night to fill the silence. I worked like there was nothing else to hold on to. Community, environmental research projects, meetings that lasted until 9 p.m., endless emails. My coworkers called me a productivity machine, but I knew I was using work to avoid feeling. Every night, I played healing podcasts to fall asleep. But sleep never came easily. I dreamed of Haley in a white wedding dress, holding Daniel's hand. I woke up with my heart pounding and sometimes tears already soaking my pillow. The only person who didn't abandon me during that time was Alicia. She came over every weekend, bringing waffles, chamomile tea, and a steel-strong spirit. "I'm not letting you wear frumpy clothes and cry your way through this whole spring, Liz. You're a warrior, not a victim." I gave a dry laugh. A warrior who can't even sleep. Even warriors need time to heal, but after that, we rise. Alicia wasn't joking. She immediately set up a Rebuild Elizabeth plan with a whiteboard hanging in the middle of my living room. It had 3 big categories: body, mind, style. Body began with dragging me to boxing classes every Monday, and Friday morning I punched the bag until my hands turned red. But strangely, each punch seemed to lift a little weight off my chest. Mind was the harder part. Alicia took me to see a therapist, Dr. Margot Lane, who had a smile like morning sunshine and eyes that made you want to spill everything inside. I sat stiffly through the first session, but by the third, I cried for 45 straight minutes. Being betrayed by the 2 people closest to you is a very particular kind of trauma, Dr. Lane said. It makes you question the whole world. But the first thing we need to relearn is trusting ourselves. I started journaling every night, writing down every raw emotion: anger, jealousy, sadness, longing, all of it. And slowly the pages became a friend I didn't need to hide from. Style, the final part of the plan, was Alicia's favorite. She dragged me through dress shops from the Pearl District to Nob Hill until I stopped cold in front of a deep red silk gown, gently slit at the hip with an elegantly open back. "This one," I whispered, staring at my reflection. "That's it," Alicia nodded. "This is your armor, and you'll wear it on the day they thought you'd be broken." For the first time in weeks, I smiled. Life was beginning to show color again. And then he appeared, a gentle twist in the story that made my heart skip off its rhythm. That night, my boss dragged me to a fundraising gala for the Columbia River Protection Society. I'd planned to decline, but I remembered Dr. Lane's words. "Elizabeth, let the world find its way back to you." I arrived late. While searching for a glass of white wine, I bumped into a tall man, splashing a few drops onto his gray button-down shirt. "Oh no! I'm so sorry. I wasn't looking." He smiled, his hazel eyes glowing with a calm that instantly settled something in me. "No worries. This shirt was kind of boring anyway. Now it has some character." I laughed, not because the joke was funny, but because of the way he said it. Calm. Sincere, not a trace of pretense. He introduced himself, Ethan Walker, 38, an urban architect who had worked in Austin and had just moved to Portland 6 months ago. We started talking like old friends randomly reunited, nothing forced. He talked about the bridges he'd designed. I told him about the green neighborhoods I was researching. Time flew, and I didn't even realize how much I'd smiled. At the end of the night, he said, "This evening's been unexpectedly wonderful, but I'd regret it if I didn't get to see you again." For the first time in 6 months, I gave a man my number. Not to spite Haley, not to prove anything, but because I genuinely wanted to see Ethan again. I was no longer the shattered Elizabeth from the old apartment. I was becoming Elizabeth, reborn. One step, one day at a time. And as the wedding day drew near, I knew one thing for sure. I wouldn't be going alone. Haley's wedding took place on an early fall Saturday morning at a lakeside resort on the outskirts of Eugene, Oregon. The air was crisp, and the sky was a silent blue, as if holding its breath, waiting to see what would unfold. I stepped out of the car with Ethan, his arm linked with mine, wearing the deep red silk gown that softly embraced my body. My hair was styled in a tidy low bun, with a few loose curls brushing my cheeks. The rhythm of my heels tapping against the stone walkway echoed one message: "I'm here, and I'm completely fine." I felt eyes turn toward me the moment I stepped through the floral arch. Whispers filled the air, glances flickered and darted back. as if people were trying to confirm whether that was Elizabeth Johnson, the woman who had once been left behind. Ethan gently squeezed my hand and whispered, "Walk like you're leading a runway show, because you are." I smiled, strangely calm. No anger, no trembling, just a steady sense of peace, like I had just crossed the steepest pass and was now looking at the road ahead. My mother came over and hugged me tightly. My father stood behind her, nodding with meaning. But neither of them brought up the past. They simply looked at Ethan and nodded again, this time in acknowledgement. The event began with the outdoor ceremony. I sat in the third row, just behind the bridesmaids. Haley walked down the aisle with Dad, wearing a fitted white dress that showed off her figure, her eyes glowing with pride. Daniel stood at the altar, his gaze briefly shifting away when it met mine. The ceremony was short and smooth. I let out a quiet sigh of relief. No one objected. I came here to close a chapter, not to ruin anything. At the evening reception, the main celebration, we moved into a glass-walled room overlooking the lake. Fairy lights hung from the ceiling like glittering stars. The dinner took place under a slightly tense atmosphere, especially when Haley and Daniel made their rounds, eventually stopping at our table. "Elizabeth," Haley said with a tight smile, "thank you for coming." "Wishing you both happiness," I replied calmly. Daniel nodded, unable to meet my eyes. Ethan stood up and shook his hand. "Ethan, Walker, nice to meet you both. Elizabeth told me this wedding is quite unique." Haley gave a dry laugh and Daniel visibly tensed. They moved on quickly. Hours later, as things settled down, the sound of a spoon tapping against a wine glass echoed through the room. Ta-da. Ha! With a microphone in hand, stepped into the center of the stage, glowing under the lights. "Before we end tonight, I'd like to say a few words." I wasn't expecting much, but her next sentence made the whole room shift. "Many of you know Daniel was once engaged to someone else." She paused, then continued. "But sometimes we have to go through a few drafts to realize who's really the right choice." A murmur rippled through the crowd. I stood frozen, breath catching. Ethan leaned in and whispered, "That was a hit." Before I could react, Ethan stood up. He raised his wineglass and stepped into the center of the room. "Excuse me, may I say a word?" The room fell silent. Haley froze. Daniel gently tugged her arm, but she ignored him. Ethan turned, scanning the room with the quiet confidence of a man who knew exactly who he was. "I'm Ethan Walker, Elizabeth's companion tonight. Some of you here might think she's a draft, but let me be clear." He paused, turning to me, his gaze warm and unwavering. "I'm not standing beside Elizabeth because she needed someone to fill a void. I'm here because I met a woman with strength, depth, and the courage to keep moving forward, even with a broken heart." The room held its breath. Ethan walked closer to our table. "She's not a draft, she's a masterpiece in progress, and I'm proud to be part of that journey." Applause began in one corner. Then it spread. The entire room erupted into a round of admiring claps. I sat still, eyes blurred with tears, not from pain, but because for the first time in months, I felt truly seen by someone. Haley stood frozen. Daniel lowered his head, avoiding every glance. I squeezed Ethan's hand as he returned to my side. He leaned in and whispered, "You don't have to prove anything to them, but if you still wanted to, well, you just did." And he was right. That night, in a red dress, surrounded by toasts not meant for the bride, I realized I had reclaimed everything I once lost. Not through anger, but through grace. I hadn't planned to walk into the dressing room that day. I really hadn't. But after Ethan's speech, the room felt too stifling. Whispers, wide eyes, and half-joking questions swirling around me. I needed a quiet place to breathe. The bridal dressing room was at the end of the hallway, behind the main reception area, separated by a white curtain. When I stepped inside, the soft lighting and faint scent of perfume helped me forget, for a moment, that I was at the center of a storm. I hadn't even closed the door when Haley appeared. Her wedding dress was disheveled, lips pale, eyes red and swollen. We stood facing each other in silence. Every mask had fallen away since Ethan stood up. No more forced smiles, no more triumphant looks. Just two women, and a lot of unspoken pain. Haley spoke first. "You're always like this," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Always quietly walking in, and then suddenly everyone's attention is on you." I sighed. "Not out of anger, not out of coldness. Haley, you talk like it's my fault for being noticed." "It is. Because you never have to try. Growing up, you were always the one praised, trusted, loved. I was always in your shadow." I leaned against the vanity, eyes locking onto the mirror where two almost identical faces reflected back, yet belonging to completely opposite worlds. "You think things were easy for me?" I asked softly. "Weren't they?" I turned to face her, no longer avoiding her gaze. "Inspires my writing. I failed my first college entrance exam because of the pressure to be as good as Elizabeth. I cried alone in my dorm room because I felt like if I didn't succeed, the whole family would be disappointed. I forced myself to love Daniel because I thought he was the right person to marry. Do you know what that feels like?" Haley stayed silent. I continued. "I never knew you felt like you lived in my shadow. If I had, I wouldn't have dared to be proud of anything I ever achieved." Haley looked down, gently scratching the lace of her wedding dress. Her voice trembled. "Daniel, he said you were too controlling, that being with you felt like living in a blueprint, but with me he could breathe, he could laugh. At first, I just wanted something you didn't have, but then you really loved him," I said. "Or did you love the feeling of finally beating me at something?" She looked up, visibly wounded, but she didn't deny it. "I don't know," Haley admitted. "Maybe both. Maybe I was just selfish." I stepped a bit closer, not too close, but just enough to close the distance that had long been a battlefield. "You took Daniel. You had this wedding. You made me lose someone I once loved deeply. But if you thought that would get you out of the shadow you put over yourself, you were wrong, Haley." Haley looked at me, tears running freely down her cheeks, mascara long gone. "I know I messed up. I tried to hurt you on purpose. I don't deserve your forgiveness." I gently shook my head. "You're right. You messed up. But I'm tired, Haley. Tired of carrying anger in my heart. I didn't come here for revenge. I came here to end a chapter." Haley choked back a sob. "Have you really moved on from Daniel?" I smiled. Not bitter, not smug. "A long time ago. You don't have to live in fear that I'll try to take him back. That was never something I wanted." Moments later, Haley stepped out of the room, her face still tear-streaked but her expression softened. Before leaving, she turned and said quietly, "He never looked at me the way Ethan looks at you. Not even once." The door closed behind her. I remained standing in front of the mirror. But the woman in the reflection was no longer the Elizabeth from 6 months ago. I had lost a lover, my trust, and a piece of my family. But I had also found something far more important: myself. 3 weeks after the wedding, Ethan and I strolled hand in hand under rows of maple trees, turning gold and amber throughout Forest Park. Leaves fell gently around us, like the last pieces of an old season being gathered by the wind. I never thought I'd be able to walk like this again, peacefully beside a man who had nothing to do with my past, yet somehow made me believe in the future. Ethan never pressed me about the past. He didn't need to know every shattered detail to love me. He loved how I smiled at puppies in the park, loved how I drank black coffee, even though I always winced at the bitterness. He even loved the scars on my soul, not because they were beautiful, but because they were real. I told him everything after the wedding, about the conversation with Haley, about her final words before she closed the door. "He never looked at me the way Ethan looks at you." Ethan just held my hand, saying nothing, but his eyes were warmer than any cliché comfort ever could be. I no longer needed everyone to understand me. I didn't live to prove I'd gotten over someone. I lived because I had overcome myself, the part that was weak, the part that clung to things that no longer belonged to me. I returned to work with new energy. The Columbia Riverside Eco Community project I led got budget approval, and I was chosen as the team leader. My parents slowly began speaking with Haley again, though not often. As for me, I kept a gentle distance. Not out of resentment, but because I understood some wounds need space to heal. Ethan and I spent most weekends exploring small towns around Oregon. Places with apple tarts, old bookshops that smelled like yellowed pages, and endless pine-covered hills. He told me about his childhood in Austin, about his mom who loved singing jazz in the kitchen, and why he left a big architecture firm to return to Portland, to feel like he could breathe again. We didn't call each other boyfriend or girlfriend in a flashy way. It was simpler. We were just there for each other. And that was enough. That evening, exactly 6 months since we first met, Ethan took me to dinner at a little restaurant tucked away in the Alberta Arts District. Our table was by the window, candlelight dancing on the rim of the wine glasses. Nothing extravagant. But the way he looked at me, there was something different. After dessert, creme brulee with a perfect golden sugar crust, he pulled a small velvet box from his coat pocket. I held my breath. He opened it. Not a sparkly diamond ring like in the movies. Instead, it was a ring with a deep green emerald, surrounded by two tiny moonstones glowing with a soft shimmer. It looked almost sinister, compared to the sparkly diamond rings I saw on the wedding. "I'm not in a rush," Ethan said, his voice low. "We can be engaged for as long as we want. A year, 2, or never marry at all. I just want you to know. You're home to me." I looked at the ring. Quietly beautiful, unpretentious, just like the way Ethan's love had made its way into my life. I nodded. No tears, no dramatic gasp, just a nod, clear, certain, and whole. "I say yes, but don't expect me to give up black coffee for you." Ethan laughed. He knew I was joking to hold back the tears. I still kept my distance from Haley and Daniel. Even when they sent a dinner invitation after their failed honeymoon, I politely declined, not because I was angry, but because I had learned how to choose what brings me peace. I no longer checked their social media. I no longer analyzed glances or gestures. I lived in the present, where Ethan cooked breakfast even though he always burned the eggs, where I redrew the map of my life with no one else holding the pen. I chose to forgive, but I didn't forget. I chose to love, but not lose myself to be loved. One early winter Sunday afternoon, I sat by the window of my little apartment, watching faint sunlight filter through bare branches. Ethan was in the kitchen, fumbling with a pot of butternut squash soup he called an upgraded version of Mom's recipe. Cinnamon, cream, and ginger filled the room. The quiet, the warmth. It wasn't flashy, but it filled my heart with peace. I picked up the old leather journal that had been with me through the darkest times and flipped to the first few pages. My messy handwriting stared back at me. Day 1. I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive. Don't know if anyone will truly see me again. I smiled softly. I knew exactly who had written that. A woman who once believed the world would stop if she lost one love. A woman who got lost between her feelings and her wounded pride. But she, that version of me from 6 months ago, was wrong. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need harsh takedowns or public takedowns. I just needed to rise, with my own kindness, with the courage to accept the truth and not let it define my worth. Daniel and Haley were no longer the main characters in my story. They were the prologue, messy, painful, but necessary for me to walk through another door. A door that led to Ethan. And to me, a better version of myself. I once thought love that came after heartbreak could only be a temporary patch. But Ethan never tried to fill any void. He let me heal on my own, and when I was ready, he stepped in, not to replace anyone, but to walk beside me. Real love doesn't make you lose yourself. It reminds you you were already whole. It didn't come as a reward after the pain. It came as the result of choosing to love again, starting with learning to love myself. I learned how to say no to dates that made me uncomfortable, learned how to stay silent in the face of unnecessary gossip, learned how to set boundaries, not to push others away, but to preserve mutual respect. My dad once said, "Happiness isn't about holding on to someone, sweetheart. It's about keeping peace in your heart, no matter who comes or goes." Back then, I didn't fully understand. Now I do. A few weeks ago, I happened to run into Daniel at a professional conference. He was seated in the very back row, the fatigue written all over his face. After the presentation, he walked over and politely said hello. There were no longing eyes, no belated apologies, just two people who once knew each other deeply, now strangers in the calmest sense of the word. My heart didn't skip a beat. No sadness, no anger. Just lightness. And Haley, we never went back to how things were. But sometimes she sends holiday family photos with a short note. "I hope you're doing well." I simply reply, "I'm well, take care." Nothing more. Because some relationships are best kept at a courteous distance to preserve what little good remains. That evening, when Ethan placed a warm bowl of soup on the table and sat across from me, he smiled softly. "I don't know what happened in your past, but thank you for not letting it get in the way of our present." I took his hand and gently squeezed it. "Thank you for not rushing me out of the darkness, but patiently waiting while I found my own way out." Outside, the season's first snow began to fall. Thin and quiet, like a whisper from the universe, that every new beginning needs a winter to rest before it blooms. And I, Elizabeth Johnson, was ready for my spring. If you've listened this far, and if you've ever been betrayed, ever fallen from something that felt unforgivable, remember this: no one defines you but yourself. No fall is too deep to rise from. And no wound lasts forever. If you choose healing over holding on, true love isn't something you win. It's something you give at the right time to the right person, after learning how to love yourself first. What do you think of Elizabeth's choices? Can you relate to her journey of healing? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to follow the channel for more heartfelt stories about life and family.